रब इश्रह ली सदरी वयस्सिर ली अमरी वहलुल उक़दतम मिन लिसानी यफ़क़हू क़ौली अऊज़ु बिल्लाहि मिनश शैतानिर रजीम बिस्मिल्लाहिर रहमानिर रहीम. Let's start with the first ayah, which is verse number 92 of Surah Al-Imran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "You shall never attain righteousness until you spend from what you love. Whatever you spend, Allah is fully aware of it." You want to become a righteous person? Here's how to become one. Spend in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but spend that which you yourself love. Is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just talking about money here? No, your wealth is not just limited to money, but your time, skills, energies, knowledge, all come under your wealth. Whatever we give in Allah's path today is what we will find in the hereafter. Surah Al-Imran was revealed in Medina, right? In the Madani surahs, the Quran teaches us how a perfect Islamic society should be. Imagine the society that will be established if everyone put others before themselves. If we give the best to others as we would prefer for ourselves. Verse number 97 is about the obligation of an adult Muslim to perform Hajj once during his lifetime. Now we get to the second major part of Surah Al-Imran, which is from verse number 102 to 120. Here the Muslims have been given organizational instructions about how to achieve victory over the kuffar and the people of the book. In verse number 102, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "O you who have believed, fear Allah as he should be feared, and do not die except as Muslims." When we have fear in our hearts of disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we will live a life which is pleasing to Him. And whatever state we live in, that is what we will die upon, and that is what we will be resurrected upon. Verse number 103 is very important ayah, where we are ordered by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to hold firmly to the rope of Allah all together and do not become divided. The state of the Muslim Ummah is upon us. We are a nation of 1.8 billion people, yet we are so weak. The reason? Our disunity. We need to look back and study our history. It is said that this ayah was revealed about the Aus and Khizraj, the two tribes who were always at war with each other. But when they became Muslims, the same people who hated each other became brothers. And that is the time they started gaining strength. We need to understand that our enemies want us divided. We are all Muslims. We believe in one God. We believe in one Prophet. And we all have the same book, the Holy Quran. Let's leave our petty differences for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and focus on becoming one. We have to become united because we have a common goal. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "You are the best nation produced as an example for mankind. You enjoin what is right and forbid what is wrong and believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala." This means a believer is not selfish. He is not just concerned about his hereafter, but also encourages others to do good and stops them from committing wrong. This is the collective duty of the Muslim Ummah. Now, the foreign policy of the Muslim state has been given. Verse 118 tells us, "O believers, do not make intimate friendship with any but your own people." And verse 119 says, "You love them, but they do not love you." The Jews living on the outskirts of Medina outwardly maintained friendly relations with the Muslims. This pretend relationship allowed them to conceal their true feelings, learn the secrets and plans of the righteous believers, and use them against them. Islam has given unusual instructions to Muslims. On one hand, we are to treat non-Muslims with compassion and kindness, but at the same time, we are warned about these hypocrites. Verse 121 to 189 is a discussion on the Battle of Uhud and its lessons. The biggest lessons for the Muslims was that now they clearly understood that they had enemies among themselves, namely the hypocrites. Besides some setbacks, the Muslims have been assured that the ultimate victory will be theirs. How? If they have these qualities: patience, avoiding interest, generously spending in the way of Allah, obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger. They are the people who race with each other, not for material gains or to get the best in this world, but they race towards forgiveness from their Lord. They believe, spend in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in ease and hardship. They control their anger, forgive people, and they are the ones who, if commit a shameful act or wrong themselves, remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then they seek forgiveness for their sins. In verse 152, the reasons for the defeat or at the battle of Uhud are given, which are losing their courage, disputing among themselves, love for war booty, and disobeying the commands of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Verse 190 to 200, which is also the last ruku, is the summary of the whole surah. It begins with the ayah that moved our Prophet ﷺ to tears in tahajjud prayers. Verily, in the creation of the heavens and the earth and the alteration of the night and day, there are indeed signs for people of understanding. The ulul albab, or the people of understanding, don't just read the Quran. They reflect upon the verses and take lessons from them. In verse 196, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, do not be deceived by the movement of the disbelievers throughout the land. Allah Ta'ala warns us not to look at the disbelievers enjoying the delights of this world, because very soon all their fun and entertainment will come to an end, and they will realize that the blessings of this world were nothing but a deception. The last verse contains some important instructions for us, where Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala says, you who believe, be steadfast, more steadfast than others. Be ready, always be mindful of Allah, so that you may prosper. Surah An-Nisa, the surah named after the women. This is the status of women in Islam, that there's an entire surah named after the women, while there's no chapter in the Quran called Ar-Rijal, meaning the men. Surah An-Nisa is a Madani surah and was revealed between the 3rd and 5th Hijri. In this surah, all people belonging to different religions have been invited towards Islam. An Islamic state in Medina had already been established, for which Muslims had been given detailed instructions in this surah. The first verse of this surah is also a part of the Khutbah Nikah and draws attention to the rights of women. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, O mankind, fear your Lord, who created you from a single soul, and from it created its match, and spread from those two many men and women. And fear Allah, in whose name you ask each other for your rights. And surely Allah is watchful over you. Here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to know that there is a higher being over both men and women. And if they don't give each other their rights, then they will be answerable to Him. After the battle of Uhud, many women had become widows and many children had become orphans. So in this surah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made arrangements for the protection of the rights of women and orphans. Verse number 3 is an ayah which needs to be understood. It's about the permission granted to men to keep 4 wives at one time. In the Jahiliyyah period, meaning before Islam, there was no limit on the number of wives a man could take. It was in this context that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala fixed the limit of 4 wives and instructed the Muslims that they may marry up to 4 wives, providing they possess the capacity to maintain justice among them. We should realize that Islam is a religion for all times. A time might come when women might outnumber men. We know that wars take a heavier toll on men compared to women. So we have to trust our Maker. He knows what's best for us. In verses 11 and 12, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala informs us about the exact proportions of inheritance to be distributed among heirs. Now this part is also problematic for some people, where they read that the share of the male will be twice that of a female. They say that women are oppressed in Islam, and this part is given as proof. Firstly, as Muslim, we must acknowledge that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is just and loves all His creations equally. How can something that has been decided for me by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be wrong? The wisdom behind this law is because the male is responsible for the financial upkeep of the women. If the woman is unmarried, her financial upkeep is the responsibility of her father and brother. If she is married, then her husband and son. What a man inherits is mostly to be spent on his family. Whereas what a woman inherits, she can spend on whatever pleases her. Who has the better deal, right? Verse 23 provides a list of those 15 women with whom marriage is prohibited. Thus, we come to the end of the 4th para. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for us to understand it and implement it in our lives. Ameen. Now let's come to the question that I will ask myself today. Do I possess the qualities of the people of paradise mentioned in verses 134 and 135 of Surah Al Imran? Inshallah, we will meet again tomorrow with the next para. Allah Hafiz.